Support for Sustainability Defined comes from NLX, the makers of JuiceBox, the best-selling electric car home charging station. The JuiceBox Smart Charger enables EV drivers to charge their cars with the cleanest and cheapest energy available. More online at juiceboxstore.com.
Hey Definers, this is Keaton, the audio engineer here at Sustainability Defined. Believe it or not, this isn't my full-time job. I'm also the founder of Audio Snack, a Detroit-based custom music house specializing in professional, made-to-order music at affordable prices. Audio Snack can't save the planet, but we can save your next project with amazing custom music. Learn more at audio-snack.com.
All right, Definers, welcome back to Sustainability Defined, where Scott and I are here defining sustainability, one concept and one bad joke at a time. This is episode 57 on energy storage. Now, I said today it's Scott and I here defining sustainability. We actually have a very special guest, one of our esteemed researchers in the form of Shannon Parker, who we lovingly call Parker. So Parker, first off, thanks for joining us, and thanks so much for what is a killer set of intro notes that you had a huge hand in, so we are pumped to have you here.
Yeah, thanks guys for having me on the show. Really excited to get rolling.
Like pumped hydro storage, Jay?
And we're off to a hot start.
It'll make sense later, everybody. It'll make sense.
All right, so Parker, tell us what we're going to be diving into in this intro today.
Yeah, so this research was fun and it was definitely a bit long. So we've got quite the outline for y'all today. We're going to start by talking about what do we mean when we talk about energy storage. Then we're going to jump into what types of energy storage systems currently exist and why those energy storage systems are important. We're also going to go through some of the downsides of energy storage, as well as review how energy storage is evolving. Then finally, as always, we'll touch on how does energy storage relate to you guys as listeners. We've got a great interviewee lined up today, Marek Kubik, who's a clean tech entrepreneur and will make for a really engaging conversation here.
Ooh, that was a smooth rundown. Okay, so Jay, let's start, and Parker, let's start with the basics here. What do we mean when we talk about energy storage?
And Scott, this is obviously a quick answer because we're basically just talking about the Energizer Bunny AAA batteries, right? Sealed and delivered.
Right, it's not just about the bunny, Jay, okay? Energy storage is much broader than those batteries we put in TV remotes. Technically, energy storage as a concept can be described as conversion of electrical energy from a power network into a form in which it can be stored until converted back to electrical energy. Simply put, energy storage is exactly what it sounds like, storing energy until you need it.
Scott, beautifully said.
Thanks, Jay.
So instead of using the technical definition to describe energy storage, it's probably best to talk about the different types of energy storage systems that currently exist in the world and help us paint this picture. So, Parker, we turn to you. What types of energy storage systems currently exist?
Well, if most of us are like you here, Jay, when we think of energy storage, we often think of batteries. This isn't necessarily wrong, as batteries are one of the many forms of energy storage and are becoming increasingly relevant in enabling vehicle electrification and behind-the-meter energy storage.
And hold on for a second, Parker. What exactly do you mean by behind the meter?
Yeah, so we'll dive back into the benefits of energy storage here in just a moment, including a more in-depth definition of what behind-the-meter energy storage is. But for now, behind the meter is a term that references where an energy storage system is in relation to the meter. So almost all businesses or homes likely have an energy meter that tells you how much energy you consume per month. Essentially, a behind the meter system is one that can provide power directly to the user without having to pass through the meter. One example of a behind the meter type system would be a home battery or solar panels that provide direct energy to your home versus back to the grid.
See, I mainly just use the energy meters on the outside to know how many units are in a building that I think is cool in DC. That's how I use it.
It's actually, Scott, that's a real estate developer trick. Well done.
Ah, thank you, Jay. Wow, that means a lot coming from you. Okay, so let's get back to talking batteries. So one of the most widely known types of energy storage systems to date is the rechargeable lithium-ion battery. It's probably the one most people have heard about. It's the type of battery you can find in your iPhone. It powers Tesla's cars. So lithium-ion, it's emerged as a leader in the battery storage space. Why is this? Well, for one, it has a high energy density, meaning lithium ions can store a lot of energy in their atomic bonds. They're also lightweight. They have a low dissipation, which means they can hold their charge. A lithium-ion battery pack, it loses only about 5% of its charge per month, compared to, for example, the 20% loss per month for nickel metal hydride batteries.
And 20% per month is kind of huge, right?
I don't like it in my retirement portfolio. I don't like it in my batteries.
And those two are always basically one and the same. So on the downside, though, lithium-ion batteries require a flammable electrolyte, which can cause small battery fires. This might be jogging your memory of those exploding Samsung batteries famously, which we all heard about not too long ago. Lithium-ion batteries are also already nearly 40% more expensive to produce than conventional alternatives that we're about to mention.
Yeah, so Jay, what other types of battery storage systems exist?
Okay, so focusing specifically on other forms of rechargeable batteries rather than the single-use alternatives, we have the following. Number one is lead acid batteries.
Which sounds horrible.
It does sound horrible.
Someone did a bad job marketing those batteries.
Well, we can't say that they're fantastic. This is the type of battery that's found in conventional gas-powered cars. Another one of these lead-acid batteries is nickel-cadmium, which is a low-cost rechargeable option to replace single-use alkaline batteries. Now, both of these options tend to be cheaper, but they're often bulky, they have higher environmental impacts, or they're just less efficient than lithium-ion alternatives. There is also nickel-zinc batteries. One provider of nickel-zinc batteries called Zinc 5 says that these batteries have a comparable energy density to lithium-ion batteries, and both nickel and zinc recycle easily and have a similar life cycle to batteries that are made up of lithium-ion.
Well, hold up, y'all. And yes, I said y'all. Batteries are great, but they're really only one form of energy storage. According to the EPA, other popular forms of energy storage include pumped hydroelectric, compressed air, flywheels, and thermal energy storage. So let's talk about pumped storage hydropower first.
Okay, so pumped storage hydropower is a configuration of two water reservoirs at different elevations that can generate power, which is called discharge, as water moves down through a turbine. This draws power as it pumps water, which is dubbed recharge, to the upper reservoir. Now, according to the Department of Energy, pumped storage currently accounts for 95% of all utility-scale energy storage in the United States. Most pumped storage was built during 1960 and 1990, when perhaps a lot of our listeners hadn't even been born, and there are currently no new ones under development.
Yeah, and speak for yourself, Jay. I was born in 88, all right? I just
stuck
caught
in
the end of
89.
Reagan, just caught the end of pumped storage hydropower.
Parker, dare we ask what year in which you were born?
Jay, that's so rude.
A few years after that, y'all. I'll leave it there.
Okay, so Parker, you're still looking for your first pump storage system, is what we can say.
Exactly.
Nice.
That is crazy, though, that it's 95%. But we do want to talk about some other types that are out there in the other 5%. So compressed air energy storage. This is where electricity is used to compress air up to 1,000 pounds per square inch. Oh, man, that's a lot of pressure. And store it, often in underground caverns. When electricity demand is high, the pressurized air is released to generate electricity through an expansion turbine generator. Another type of energy storage is flywheels. According to the Energy Storage Association, a flywheel is a rotating mechanical device that is used to store rotational energy. There's only 3 of these in the United States, so I guess they're collectible. Maybe they'll be on eBay someday. The main criticism of flywheels is that they can't deliver sustained energy over long periods.
We also have thermal energy storage. So thermal systems use heating and cooling methods to store and then release energy. Examples include 1, ice storage in buildings so that compressors don't need to be run. And then number 2, solar generated heat and molten salt that can be used when there is no sunlight. So in all cases, excess energy charges the storage system. For example, it freezes the water or it heats the molten salt, and then it is then released later as needed. Okay, let's take a deep breath. We have made it through the most technical stuff. Well played, team. Now we can talk about why energy storage is important.
Yeah, so now on to the good stuff, y'all. Why is energy storage important?
Tell us, Parker. We want to know.
The reality is it's tons of reasons, Scott.
Yes.
At a high level, energy storage systems can time shift energy, storing at times of surplus and releasing at times of deficit.
And guys, this sounds like a superpower, right? That someone from Marvel would have, time shift energy.
I actually watched Tenet yesterday, and that plot was way too confusing for me to understand. But I feel like this could be a Christopher Nolan movie, time-shifting energy.
Time shift energy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I have a feeling he's a listener, so maybe we'll see this come to fruition.
Right.
All right. So let's ask, why do we need time shift in the first place? Well, fundamentally, this ties back into the infrastructure of the power grid. So, quick crash course. A power grid is a delicate balance between supply and demand. Essentially, power companies are constantly trying to balance the amount of power they are generating with the amount that is being consumed by end users like us.
Sounds like a fun game.
Sounds like a tough game.
Tough game, a lot of pressure, but...
high stakes.
Yeah.
One way to help balance fluctuations in electricity supply and demand is to store electricity during periods of relatively high production and low demand, and then release it back into the electric power grid during periods of low production and high demand.
Yeah, Jay, this balancing is really the role of grid operators, which are some real life superheroes, because they have to respond to that real time demand. As a result, if energy unpredictably spikes, they can have difficulty responding, which could lead to a loss of power. And we'll talk more about this under the topic of energy resilience in just a minute. But also because demand of energy spikes during certain times, this can impact the cost of electricity. A unit of energy, typically a kilowatt hour, may be more expensive when everybody wants it on a hot day to keep their air conditioning running versus, say, a pleasant night when you can just keep the AC off and simply open your windows.
And definers, of course, this is a oversimplification. We could do a whole other episode entirely on power grids, so we're just going to try to keep this high level.
I hope we do an episode on power grids, Jay. That'd be a good one.
I do think we're overdue, in fact.
For sure. So ultimately, though, because energy storage enables this time-shifting ability, it helps contribute to overall energy efficiency and a ton of benefits. So first, energy storage systems enable the renewable energy transition. That's a benefit. Most renewable energy sources, like solar, they're naturally intermittent. The sun goes down, the wind stops blowing. Because of this, they can't generate around-the-clock energy that we need to support society. With effective energy storage systems, we would be able to store any excess energy generated during peak generation hours for use later.
Energy storage benefit number 2. Energy storage systems support energy resilience, as Parker alluded to earlier. We've noted that the balance between supply and demand on the power grid is very fragile. When supply cannot meet demand, grid operators are forced to make a difficult decision, including rolling blackouts such as those seen in California back in August. Anyone that's experienced a blackout can tell you that these can cause serious disruption and discomfort to residents and businesses, so we can say with full certainty that these are not quite as fun to experience as it was perhaps when we were a kid with snowstorms and we did not have to go to school.
I love that, yeah. And where energy storage helps is by decreasing the likelihood of planned blackouts from occurring. More stored energy equals more resources that grid operators, as they're playing their fun, very serious game, have to rely on to satisfy peak demand. The behind-the-meter, smaller energy storage systems, these are particularly helpful for the resilience we're talking about. The big batteries with connections that are cut due to a natural disaster, not so helpful in resilience, right? This reflects a larger point that the value add of energy storage differs based on the type of system you have and the end user. Now, energy storage systems can't prevent all blackouts, like those caused by natural disasters, though this is where they can provide their third main benefit. I'm going to kick it over to Parker now.
Yeah, Scott, this third main benefit is really quite huge. And that's that energy storage systems support diesel displacement. Usually in the case of natural disasters or any other event where a backup form of energy is needed, many institutions and individuals turn to diesel generators. Beyond fossil fuel consumption, which we know is bad for the environment, diesel generators can be problematic for other reasons, including health concerns.
I feel like you hear these generators going, and it's more they're just annoying because they're loud. I didn't know that they had these negative effects in the sense of what emissions they were giving off.
Oh, yeah, both hearing health and so much more.
Yeah.
Some of these other acute health concerns include carbon monoxide poisoning. In fact, in a study from 2005 to 2017, more than 900 people died of carbon monoxide poisoning, and many more were injured from the use of portable generators. So all bad jokes aside here, folks, make sure you're never running a generator in a confined space. There are also longer-term health risks associated with diesel. Diesel exhaust contains more than 40 toxic air contaminants, including many known or suspected cancer-causing substances such as benzene, arsenic, and formaldehyde.
So I think we can all agree here that the less diesel generators we have to use, the better. And of course, energy storage could displace these systems by providing portable, immediate sources of energy in times of crisis. As battery energy storage becomes more affordable, this could also improve health and safety outcomes following disaster events, because more individuals will have access to energy necessary for emergency communication and for powering critical devices. And beyond just the context of a disaster, the idea of making energy more affordable is appealing in its own right.
Okay, so we've talked about the renewable energy transition as a benefit, supporting energy resilience, supporting diesel displacement. So now the fourth energy storage benefit we want to talk to you about is that it could make our everyday electricity cheaper, improving energy access for all, including the most vulnerable populations. As we mentioned earlier, energy can be more expensive during peak demand because when everybody wants that electricity at the same time, additional more expensive power plants, they have to be brought online quickly to meet that demand, and that raises the cost per kilowatt of energy supplied because oftentimes these dormant power plants that need to be brought online, they're more expensive to run. So energy costs, they can be disproportionately higher for minorities. One recent study found that black renters pay $273 more than their white counterparts, and black homeowners pay $408 more for energy than their white peers.
This is a critical topic, and for more on this idea of energy poverty, we recommend checking out the January 2021 podcast episode of the Resources Radio podcast that features an interview with the University of Michigan's Tony Reams. Go Blue.
I knew you'd put in the go blue there, Jay.
I've got no choice.
Understood. So by being able to store more energy, we lower the cost of energy for everyone by avoiding the need to build more expensive plants simply to meet that peak demand. Excess energy generated during the day with more energy storage could be sold at night or vice versa. And think of what you could do with those extra savings from your monthly electricity bill. Jay, I know you would buy your mom something special.
And Scott Parker, the same mothers, they can never have enough flowers.
Wow, Jay. Wow, Scott. So wholesome of y'all.
We're mama's boys, and we're proud of it. So let's get back to it. So as energy consumption is correlated with better economic and health outcomes, and electricity specifically is correlated with improved education outcomes, cheaper electricity provides pathways for people to upgrade their quality of life. This is true with energy storage or just more electricity generation generally. It's definitely correlated with better quality of life.
Beyond enabling renewable energy and diversion from fossil fuel systems, energy storage has other indirect environmental impacts, mainly by displacing and eliminating the need for more coal plants and other dirty energy sources that we currently rely on for peak demand. Avoiding those dirty sources to meet peak demand will mean net savings of greenhouse gas emissions. Note, though, that energy storage can be more inefficient than using energy directly, since some energy is lost during the conversion process into storage. But in general, if it's between using a dirty energy source and storage is better.
Sadly, y'all, there are some downsides to energy storage. Wah, wah.
Yeah, way to bring down the podcast parties, Parker.
By now, you are probably thinking that it sounds complicated and cool, and what could possibly be wrong with it? Some of the functional downsides of each technology were mentioned above, though other negatives can include environmental and safety impact.
Pumped hydro storage, which we mentioned earlier in the show, can impact wildlife habitats and migratory pathways. They can cause upstream flooding damage and release greenhouse gas emissions from organic material that breaks down while trapped in the reservoirs.
No wonder they're not planning on building any more of those.
Right, so maybe they're onto something. Additionally, batteries might contain potentially harmful materials like lithium and lead, which can be problematic if not disposed of properly. Extracting lithium and other minerals like cobalt and nickel is resource intensive as well. It can entail high water use, soil disruption, air pollution, and the potential for toxic chemicals to leach into the water supply. Consumers are also concerned about the lack of safety standards around batteries, though as we'll discuss shortly, there is a renewed conversation around these safety measures.
So safety is important, but also there's affordability. So some home energy systems, namely batteries, they're not the most affordable at the moment. This would be quite the ask for Christmas. Solar battery installations such as Tesla's Powerwall can reach up to $11,000 with installation fees. Oof. This means that while the cost is falling, it's still not accessible to most people. And it's fallen quite a bit. A report from McKinsey states that battery costs dropped more than 50% between 2012 to 2017. And that may sound like quite the drop. It is, but that report also stated that a 70% drop would mean a $170 per kilowatt hour price by 2025. That is still far away from one estimate we saw of $20 per kilowatt hour. So a 70% drop would get you down to $170, but this estimate says you need to get to $20 per kilowatt hour to have renewable energy storage that meets all demand. So we still need quite a drop in how much these systems cost for them to be really widely available.
All right, Scott, we've got the good, we've got the bad, we've got the technical, and now we're going to focus on how energy storage is evolving.
The future.
Woo! According to the EPA, more innovative forms of energy storage under development include flow batteries, saltwater batteries, electrochemical capacitors, and superconducting magnetic energy storage. Issues with these include rare and expensive metals and having low energy density, which is essentially the amount of energy provided per volume. Finally, in mid-2020, there was an announcement of Form Energy's pilot with Great River Power that sent ripples of excitement through the energy community.
So much excitement. I could feel it.
So much. It was electric.
Ooh.
This pilot is the first commercial deployment of Form Energy's proprietary long-duration energy storage system, which is rated for use up to 150 hours, nearly 38 times the current 4-hour time period commonly used by utility-scale lithium-ion batteries.
And Parker, we want to underscore this a little bit because we're really on the brink of a total breakthrough here of energy storage should this long-duration technology prove both functional and scalable. Now, it is not just duration that we're excited about here, but also the size of the batteries themselves. In California, as of January 2021, hot off the press, there is a 300 megawatt lithium-ion battery online with a 100 megawatt addition coming. The 300 megawatt lithium-ion battery storage system alone is the largest of its kind in the world. Together, they will be able to discharge enough electricity to power roughly 300,000 California homes for 4 hours during evenings, heat waves, and other times when energy demand outstrips supply, like when a new Sustainability Defined podcast episode is released and everyone downloads it at once. These examples are big ones, but in general, a lot of energy storage was installed in 2020. Nationwide, a record 1.2 gigawatts of storage were installed through the first 3 quarters of 2020. The Energy Storage Association says installations doubled in 2020 and would have tripled if not for a little thing called COVID-19.
Freaking coronavirus.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's what I focus on in my day job. I got to talk recycling here. There's also innovation in the recycling of utility scale batteries, which will mean less of the harmful mineral extraction touched on earlier. In 2019, the U.S. Department of Energy launched the ReCell Center, a lithium-ion battery research and development recycling center. Its goal is to foster a battery recycling industry in the United States. There's also the Global Battery Alliance, a public-private partnership of 70 organizations focused principally on how best to increase the repurposing or recycling of batteries.
And the final way that energy storage is evolving is that it may be evolving when it comes to diversity. The Energy Storage Association CEO Kelly Speaks Backman said recently that the industry needs to balance economic, the environment, and justice. We couldn't find any current numbers on the energy storage workforce, but we do know that the renewables workforce is lacking in diversity. For example, a Solar Foundation report found that the general population of the United States is 60% white, whereas the nation's solar workforce is 73% white, and the solar industry's senior executive level is a whopping 88% white.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot. So hopefully that it does evolve on the diversity front and the others that we talked about. But let's relate this to the listeners. How does energy storage relate to you all, the definers? So first of all of the benefits mentioned above will indirectly or directly benefit you. So yay for that. Second, there are residential energy storage systems, such as the home battery systems we mentioned earlier. These home energy storage systems are great substitutes for your typical backup generator and can help to reduce your energy bills. Two systems we found include Goal Zero's Yeti X Portable Power Solutions. You might as well throw Yeti in the name and it sounds cool. And
exactly.
then, right? And then number two, Tesla's Powerwall. These are both behind-the-meter energy solutions, which again means they can supply power directly to you. They can be charged up during non-peak hours when electricity is cheaper, and then you can use that energy during peak times or during outages to keep your life moving smoothly.
Calling attention to all electric vehicle owners. This is another way that energy storage relates to you. With the growing popularity of electric vehicles, there is an increasing interest in vehicle-to-grid V2G technology, which draws unused power from your EV's battery storage system to the smart grid. Our frequent sponsor, NLX, is a big player here. Their smart charging platform helps to support the managed charging necessary for V2G technology. According to a November 2019 article in GreenBiz, last year, so 2018, NLX said its products in California provided a 30 megawatt virtual battery to the grid, roughly equivalent to the power needs of a small suburb. The company projects that by 2025, a JuiceNet virtual battery could provide the equivalent energy of 47 natural gas power plants once 3 million electric vehicles are on the roads in the United States.
And this is a good point for us to plug an old Sustainability Defined episode, an oldie but a goodie, episode 49. It's on e-mobility with Giovanni Bertolino from NLX. I also want to mention, I was watching Shark Tank a couple weeks ago, and I saw a pitch for a portable EV charger that's called Roadie. It's from a company called Spark Charge. It stores energy for when you need it, so it helps solve the range anxiety issue we discussed in the e-mobility episode. They must be onto something because Lori Grenier, Mark Kubik, invested a total of $1 million in this thing. Got the deal.
Wow, that's amazing, Scott. Another exciting thing is that using this technology, so some of that from someone like Spark Charge or just the broader V2G technology, utilities could incentivize electric vehicle owners to charge during non-peak hours with lower rates and provide excess supply during peak hours. Unfortunately, it's not a perfect solution. There's still a number of concerns with this V2G technology, namely around two-way energy flow capability, changing driver behavior, and incorporation into legal agreements. But even if you aren't selling your energy back to the grid directly, imagine the possibility of being able to use your car like one of those home battery packs mentioned above. One company, Fermata Energy, is working on readying a technology that allows people to power their homes with their car's battery, and they're hoping it's going to be available this year. Go 2021.
And finally, speaking of 2021, Parker, with President Biden now in office, let's go. Biden's clean energy plan could lead to exciting new developments in energy storage capabilities. Currently, his plan includes establishing a new Advanced Research Projects Agency on Climate, or ARPA-C, which will support grid-scale storage at 1/10 the cost of lithium-ion batteries. Also, his Build Back Better plan calls for historic procurement and investments in storage to realize a goal of 100% clean energy by 2035 for grid operations across the country. We always love a good climate and energy advocate, so make sure to write your state's representatives indicating support for these policies as they develop in the legislature.
Guess what, Scott and Jay? We made it.
Oh my
We
God.
made it.
Sorry about this. That was definitely a bit of a long one, but
Don't apologize.
Yeah, no
It was
apologies
great.
here. No.
it's been great to be here with you guys. And I am so excited to go ahead and introduce our fantastic interviewee, Marek Kubik, who is a clean tech entrepreneur. Marek has a PhD in engineering and is a man of many hats, all of which are centered around energy storage.
He is a founding member of a leading global energy storage technology and services company called Fluence. He is also an expert advisor to the United Nations on cleaner electricity systems and a freelance contributor to Forbes.
You can learn more about Marek's energy storage work and thoughts, as well as his many travels, at mkubic.com. Let's go hear what Marek has to say about energy storage. Support for Sustainability Defined comes from NLX, the makers of Juicebox, the best-selling electric car home charging station. The Juicebox can charge an EV up to 13 times faster than other home charging stations. Juicebox's smart charging Wi-Fi features also help drivers charge with the cheapest and cleanest energy available. Schedule car charging when electricity rates are lower, or with JuiceNet Green software, charge with the cleanest energy on the grid. Sync your EV charging to times when solar and wind power are at maximum production and fossil fuel power sources are at a minimum. More online at juiceboxstore.com.
Are you tired of wasting countless hours searching for the perfect music for your project and settling on something that's just not quite right? Let Audio Snack's team of songwriters and producers bring your vision to life with custom music at affordable rates. Your work deserves better, and that's why with Audio Snack, you have total control over the sound of your project. We will work directly with you to create music that you can be proud of. Check us out at audio-snack.com. Audio Snack, music so good you'll come back for seconds.
All right, Definers, we are now joined by Marek Kubik, Managing Director for the UK, Ireland, and Israel. Very interesting territory for Fluence. And you're joining us from Amsterdam, Marek, so thanks for taking the time to join us. We're excited to talk with you.
No problem. Likewise, Jay. Thanks. And Scott.
Sure. So, Marek, we bow down to your technical knowledge here. Jay, I don't know if you ever thought about doing engineering. Never for me. I'm not smart enough.
I gave it a passing thought, Scott, but whenever I see an engineer now, I think just like you did, you recognize the amount of technical training that goes into it, and it has just completely bypassed me.
Yes. So Marek, did you know when you were pursuing this degree that you would focus on energy storage?
No, actually. I mean, when I was doing it, it wasn't specifically supposed to be on energy storage. So I did first a master's in engineering, and then a PhD that was focused on renewable energy integration. And it just so happens that when you start looking at renewable energy integration more closely, it doesn't take you too long before you realize that energy storage is going to be pretty key to achieving that. So it wasn't ever the objective at the outset. It was something that I discovered through the course of the doctorate.
Yeah, I mean, do you remember the time you were exposed to energy storage and you're like, oh my God, this is so interesting and can have such a big impact? So
the purpose of the thesis, the PhD that I did, was to understand what the future would look like with respect to more renewable energy coming onto the grid. And I was working for essentially a global utility, a company called AES, pretty large in the US. But they had power stations in Northern Ireland, traditional fossil fuel ones, so coal, gas, oil. And they were looking at basically what more renewable energy being added to the grid would mean for their system. So actually, I started off looking at what can you do to make power plants more flexible in order to be able to help integrate more renewables. But it only gets you so far, because ultimately, if you want to get to a completely sustainable energy system, you can't have any thermal plant on the system at all. And at the moment, you kind of need the power plants to be providing the kind of services like the stability that helps balance out the variability of renewables. And so it was sort of through working at a coal power station that I came across energy storage, because although AES was working on, had these fossil fuel power plants, it was also like the very first company in the world to put on a utility scale battery to the grid. And it was around that sort of time, 2007, 2008, so just a couple of years before I'd started in the role. So it was really at its infancy, but it was just starting to be deployed in the US. And so then that got me thinking, well, couldn't we bring it over to Europe and do the same thing? And that led essentially to one of the first commercial battery storage projects in Europe, which we built at exactly that same whole power station.
So, Marek, I think we're going to get into this a little bit more later, but definers can probably already tell that you've got already a very nuanced approach to the topic from different angles at the same time. So I know that Scott and I like to think that the two of us have a lot going on because we've got a day job and the podcast. We look at your resume and we're like, okay, we need to stop chirping here because you are a managing director, you are a Forbes contributor, you are a UN expert advisor, and of course, a futurist as well.
Why not?
So what does wearing all these hats do as far as informing your approach to this topic of energy storage?
Yeah, it's a great question. Aside from keeping me extremely busy, I mean, energy storage is an interdisciplinary topic to start with. I don't think you can approach it looking at the topic with any one specific lens. The main thing I think that it lets me do is not stay in a bubble, because it's very easy to focus just on the grid connected storage piece, not look upstream or downstream of that. I expect we're going to get into that somewhere in this conversation. Is there, lithium, cobalt, whatever the raw material supply chain is, upwards of what we do, and downstream of that, recyclability, things like that. So seeing the whole spectrum, particularly through the articles I've written for Forbes, I go off and try and investigate and expand my own understanding of the full life cycle of energy storage systems, and are they really sustainable? And then the other is, I guess, in terms of breadth, and that's maybe where more the UN side of things comes in, because I was pretty shocked and honored to be asked to be part of this UN group, experts on cleaner electricity systems. And showing up there, I'm so used to sitting and speaking about renewables and storage as if everyone agrees that that's the pathway we should be taking. But you have all these different global interests and all these other different segments of the energy sector also at the table, right? You've got people advocating for carbon capture and storage, for nuclear, for energy efficiency. So as opposed to just looking up and down, it's also looking left and right, which I guess makes me, in the consultant sort of 2x2 matrix all over the place. But I find it very helpful for informing what I do on a day-to-day basis.
No, I mean, so much of sustainability is interdisciplinary and trying to keep up with so many different threads and then applying them to your area. So kudos to you for keeping up with the left, the right, the up and the down, like you were saying. And you also mentioned, though, about that first commercial battery energy storage array that you put in, I guess, at that coal plant that you said you worked at, quite a while ago. So that was in 2015 that was put in. And we're wondering how that experience relates to what you're trying to do today. And do you put in the same sort of batteries? And that was just back in 2015, or have things really changed in terms of like the kind of batteries you're putting in, the capacity of those batteries?
So I guess the sizes of the systems are changing in the sense that we're seeing bigger and bigger projects being built, either on an individual project level, like we're starting to see mega batteries, giga batteries being built, like really, really huge energy storage projects, or larger fleets of them. But the underlying technology itself isn't I say it's not radically changing. It depends on which perspective you look at it. From a electrochemical perspective, it's not really changing. It's lithium-ion batteries, which is the same technology we've had really since the 80s. What's changing is the cost, the performance, the efficiency of that same same technology, the same basic cell. So lithium-ion since 2010, so in the past 10 years, has fallen 90% in cost, and it's improved about 3 times in density. So if you were to build a system 10 years ago, it would take 3 times as much space and cost you 10 times as much as it does now. And that's just a snapshot in time. That's not a trend that's stopped, right? If you look at the next 10 years, the projection is, well, even less than 10 years that the cost of batteries is going to halve yet again. What basically that means is just these systems are getting cheaper, more efficient, higher performance, and more compact, which means that they can do more and more jobs in more and more places cost effectively.
Okay, so Marek, with that excellent context, today you are the managing director for the UK, Ireland, and Israel at Fluence, as we mentioned earlier. So, of course, Fluence is an energy storage technology company, and this is actually a really fun fact to read. You guys recently reached what we call a unicorn status, which is essentially a more than $1 billion valuation in just under 3 years, which is an incredible feat to begin with. So, A, congratulations. And of course, you've been there since the start as a founding member. You're now responsible for establishing and scaling teams that oversee $250 million worth of energy storage technology and services sales with clients across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Okay, that's a huge order in itself. We then read, as Scott and I are doing our research, on Fluence's website about the 6th generation tech stack energy storage system. So looking back to the intro, as definers are following us through this episode, we talked about many types of energy storage in the intro and not just batteries. So is this 6th generation tech stack, is that just one system that you guys sell? And how does it compare to other energy storage systems on the market?
Yeah, great question. We're a horizontally integrated company. So we're, in a sense, technology agnostic. Probably more accurately, we describe ourselves as electrochemically agnostic. As you guys will have talked about, covering the entire breadth of energy storage technologies, there are a lot out there. But essentially, lithium-ion batteries are the ones that are experiencing these radical cost, density, performance improvements. And so for the significant majority of jobs you need to do in the near term to help get renewable energy onto the grid and integrate as high a level as possible, it's all lithium-ion. But even within lithium-ion, there are many different form factors. You have cells, you have pouches, you have prisms, you have different types of chemistry, NMC, nickel, manganese, cobalt, which is the high energy density stuff that's typically used in cars. You have LFP, which is lithium iron phosphate, is less energy dense, but tends to last longer and higher performing, safer. So there's all sorts of different nuances to the kind of chemistry that's built. And when I say we're this horizontally integrated company, we're able to draw upon the best innovations that come out of all the different battery suppliers, the OEMs, and integrate that into one modular and scalable form factor. So the building block of all of our technology, this tech stack that you're talking about, is a cube. Mm-hmm. And that cube essentially comes pre-assembled in a factory form factor with the batteries installed, with the cooling systems, the fire suppression, all of the stuff you need. So that it's effectively a plug and play box that you deliver to sites and then just connect up and configure in whatever way you need to do a whole different range of jobs. So the form factor is the same, the architecture is the same, but what you put inside the box and how you configure it on a site-specific basis does change. So you might use the same cubes to deliver 2 or 3 of them at a small commercial and industrial customer site, a behind-the-meter type of use, or you might string together a massive amount of them to form one of these utility-scale gigabatteries to replace the transmission line. It's the same building blocks, but configuring Lego in lots of different ways.
Yeah, and Scott, this makes me think of as we've charted the course of this episode, and to what Marek just referenced, there are so many sub-specializations here when it comes to energy storage that it maybe was a tall task for us to try to knock it as best we could in one episode. But it's fascinating, Marek, to hear about all the different, as you're describing your horizontal orientation, the ability to see all these different elements and be able to combine these specialties into one that fits different types of uses.
We talked about so many different types of energy storage, Jay, and I feel like lithium ion, to be honest, we kind of treat it as a whole, its own thing.
Right.
When we could have probably spent a fair bit of the intro just going into the various ways you can play with things within a lithium ion battery. It sounds like, Marek, that you go into a client and you talk about, well, yeah, your lithium ion battery, you have this different option, and for your needs, you should go with this, and we'll modify our base tech stack to meet your needs in this way.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And like one of the key things I guess to think about with energy storage as well is duration, right? Like how long do you need to store energy for? Because it's a time limited resource. You can only charge for so long and only discharge for so long. But the reason that we're seeing that that lithium-ion batteries are so versatile and so flexible is that actually they perform extremely well from anywhere from sort of minutes. The sort of shortest duration systems we're building these days are about 1 hour, all the way up to somewhere around like 6 hours. And then as battery costs continue to fall, 7 hours, 8 hours becomes cheaper. So lithium-ion batteries are extremely versatile because they can deal with, both kind of short second to second balancing on the grid, as well as like more serious time shifting of like renewables. So solar and storage in particular is becoming more common, like shifting the solar from the middle of the day to the evening peak where typically the sun is set. So solar at night becoming, essentially a resource on tap. Seasonal storage or weekly storage is a different beast, and that's where other technologies will be needed as well. If you want to get from like 80% renewables to 100% renewables, there's that last step that requires a different sort of set of technological characteristics.
Okay, and you talk about the stack that you all are selling, and it sounds like it's a pretty common thing that you sell. But we're wondering if you can tell us about your clients in different areas. And I know you focus on UK, Ireland, and Israel, but for Europe, Middle East, Africa, US, and I understand you go on over 100 flights a year, so you're seeing a lot of different stuff all over the place. Probably not 100 flights this past year, but can you just give us a sense of the energy storage landscape across these different regions?
You're right. Well, used to travel a lot, not so much in the recent year for certain reasons.
You'll use your points another time, Marek.
Yeah. So and the needs for energy storage is very different across different markets. So like some of the biggest like leading regions for energy storage around the world, like the US is one of the largest and the first is leading in the world at the moment. The UK and Ireland, Chile, interestingly, has a lot of storage. Southeast Asia. So like there are a bunch of different sort of areas where storage is growing especially fast for different reasons. And the kinds of systems that you'd built, again, say that the building block that we're using now is the same, but you would configure it differently depending on what it's going to do. So in the US, for instance, a lot of these energy storage systems are being put in as what's called peaker replacements. So traditionally, gas or oil-fired peakers in the electricity grid are being used to run for just like a couple of hours a day, a couple of times a year, to fill in shortfall gaps where there's not enough supply from other resources. But it's a really inefficient and expensive way of building a power plant. It's only going to be used for a few hours a year.
Yeah, we hit on this in the intro.
Oh, you did? Good.
Yes.
Well, yeah, so basically batteries are far more effective at doing that job and then doing useful stuff the rest of the year round. So in the US, you see a lot of 4-hour duration systems that are basically there to replace peaking power plants. If you look at the UK or Ireland, both are sort of island systems. Like they have some electrical connection to continental Europe, but not much. They have huge wind resources. They have aging power plants. So they have a lot of actual renewable variability on the system that needs to be balanced. So most of the batteries being put in the UK and Ireland are providing second to second stability and balancing of supply and demand, because the wind as a proportion of generation here is much higher. Chile is really interesting because we're seeing two particularly novel uses for storage there. So like one is solar and storage, which I talked a bit about earlier. So in Chile, Fluence is building a 560 megawatt hour battery alongside a large solar farm to basically do time shifting of renewables day to evening. But the other one that I think is far more interesting is actually a virtual dam. So you talked about pumped hydro in the intro. Well, pumped hydro has its challenges from a geography perspective. Like obviously, if you have mountains, you can use it. But even if you do have mountains, communities are not necessarily happy with you damming them and flooding them. So run of river hydro is considered more sustainable. But with run of river, you don't have storage until now, because if you put in a battery next to a run of river hydro power station, you effectively can provide energy storage without having to build the dam and build the pumped hydro. So that's very long duration. It's sort of like 5 or 6 hour duration storage, but it functions the same way as a pumped hydro reservoir would, but you don't need to build the dam, and you don't need to go through the 10 years of environmental planning, assessment, permitting, pouring all the concrete and so on.
Wow. I had not heard of that. I just want to clarify before we move on. When you say a 4-hour duration, 8-hour duration, like, are you saying that there's a certain amount of capacity in the battery and then it can give off that capacity for up to 8 hours? Like, help me understand that, because maybe I'm just missing something. I just want to make sure I've got it.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So if you've got, let's say, 100 megawatt system, right, that's the power element of it. And then you'll have the power for a certain amount of time. So if the batteries are fully charged at 100% and it's a 4-hour battery, you would have 100 times 4, i.e. 400 megawatt hours of energy storage capacity in that battery. So when I say, like, I'm shorthand saying, like, the duration, that's sort of like the maximum capacity of the system. So if you had it all the way empty and charged it all the way up, it could do 100 megawatts charging for 4 hours, or vice versa. If it's full and you discharge it, you could do it for 4 hours at full power, or 8 hours at half that power, or 16 hours at a quarter, et cetera, et cetera.
All right, thanks.
Excellent. Great to know. So, Marek, that example is actually really interesting, because there are all kinds of environmental issues with dams that this virtual storage that you're using in this example could rectify. But that's, again, Scott, as we're learning, yet another subtopic to be explored under this larger topic of energy storage. I want to transition us, though, into another area of this discussion, which, again, we touched on the intro, which is just issues and complications with this. And we're curious to get your perspective, Marek. So the first question is, do you worry about the impact involved with extracting the resources necessary to make energy storage systems, as well as the potential for improper disposal at the end of their lives?
I would say that I think about it and I track it, rather than to say that I'm worried about it. Like, it's definitely a consideration, but often those that bring it up as a topic are using it as a bit of a straw man argument against new technology, and then sort of ignoring it for the base case, because nothing within sort of human progress or ingenuity doesn't require some form of raw material, right? So these arguments are typically used by the ICE industry against electric vehicles, of saying, oh, well, you have to mine lithium or cobalt and so on. But
did you say ICE industry? What's that?
Oh, internal combustion engine. So like traditional fossil fuel cars.
Got it.
And Marek, you're actually touching on a really interesting topic here, which is kind of this outsized focus on what could be a relatively smaller counter argument for this industry, which we actually heard in our e-mobility episode, Scott, if you remember that, with Giovanni Bertolino, who was with NLX, was their head of e-mobility in the US and Canada. So it's interesting that we see that resurface again here, but Marek, please continue.
Yeah, no problem. So it's traditionally used either by the fossil fuel industry on the power grid, or by, say, the internal combustion engine industry, arguing against EVs or arguing against renewables and against storage, of saying, oh, well, to build wind turbines, you need steel. So, that requires a resource, or to build batteries, you need lithium or cobalt or have you. So these things exist no matter what you're going to build. And so, yes, they're considerations. But at the same time, the energy storage industry has pretty good answers to most of these questions. So the first one maybe to tackle is actually resource abundancy. So one of the arguments is, well, there's not enough, lithium in the world to power the electric grid, or to create this transformation. And that's just fundamentally wrong. There is. It's just a case of how you extract it. And the real challenge is how quickly you can scale up that extraction. Because to build a traditional lithium mine, for instance, it takes about 7 years to scale up, whereas the growth of the industry is far, far faster. So I'm more worried about actually the pace of bringing online more raw materials than them actually existing. Now, the sustainability aspect is another one that is definitely relevant and important. But again, there's technologies that are coming in and helping. It creates step changes in that process. So one of the things that I wrote in my Forbes contributor role was on essentially the lithium-ion industry upstream of what we do, and how you extract lithium to actually be used in batteries, which are used for everything, right? It's not just stationary storage. It's in electric cars. It's in consumer electronics, and so on. Basically, the way you do it at the moment is you create these massive brine pools. So places like Bolivia, you basically have these big salt flats, and you just evaporate off the water, and you're left with different minerals and so on. One of which is lithium. So actually, it's environmentally friendly from an extraction point of view, because there's no like deep mining or drilling under the earth. It's literally just scooping. Like it's basically like you would with salt water, right, to get salt out of the water. But on the other hand, it does use water. So nothing's perfect. But there are new extraction technologies that are coming along that, rather than having to do that and spend months and months filtering out all these different minerals, you basically pour like a saline brine of this lithium through like a special filter, and the lithium comes out, and the extraction potential then is much, much higher, and it's much, much faster. So there are these technologies that are coming through to solve each of the sort of upstream supply chain challenges from a speed, efficiency, land footprint perspective to make things better.
But would you say, Marek, it's fair to say that there's no upstream issue, let's say at least, where you're like, well, shoot, we don't really have a good answer, or even we're not on our way to figure that out yet? It sounds like you feel like there's some issues, but we're addressing them.
I think that's a great summarization. So yeah, each of the points that are raised, there are answers. Like the fundamental thing is there are sustainable ways of extracting the minerals. The minerals themselves are all the raw materials you need to create this transition are there. The main thing that we don't have a perfect answer to is like, how do you scale it up quickly enough to meet the growing demand for EVs and stationary storage, just for how long it takes to increase production of these raw materials.
Okay, and before we get to the future stuff, because we want to talk about affordability going into the future technology, one of the things I know we wanted to bring up with you is that we actually, to be honest, we're looking for someone to interview who had a background that was Black, Indigenous, people of color. We've made this racial justice commitment to try to make the people we're interviewing more diverse. We're thrilled to be interviewing you, and you obviously have so much information to share with our listeners. So we're glad to have you. But we did want to ask, because we had trouble finding someone that was diverse and had the kind of knowledge and experience that we were looking for. Is that something you've noticed? Maybe a lack of diversity in the energy storage field? And how do you think that the industry can advance diversity and inclusion?
It's a good question, because I'm reflecting on Fluence and how we've grown and scaled. I would say that I don't have stats to be able to throw out. We have a very diverse team in terms of nationalities, backgrounds. As we've grown, it's something we specifically consider. Like, we think it's important because when you're working in a space, collective blindness is a thing. Like, if everyone thinks the same as you, it looks the same as you just create these echo chambers and aren't really thinking about the issues and topics fully. So we try to be a diverse employer, and so if this is you, please apply. We're hiring like crazy at the moment. So how about that?
Excellent. That's a great plug, Marek. And as we are discussing diversity and inclusion here, there's another topic that we want to touch on that gets into a little bit of the future of energy storage, and that is this affordability question. So we know that energy storage could make our energy system more resilient and create cheaper energy for all, but there are, of course, real affordability issues that we're having in the present. So the question is, do you think we'll get to a point where the affordability problem goes away and energy storage is widely available, which would then have all these significant beneficial environmental, social, and economic effects?
Yeah, like we all have our own personal computers, or we're going to have our own personal energy storage systems one day?
It's a good question. I'm going to butcher this quote, but you may have heard the Nietzsche quote, God is dead. But I think the affordability question of energy storage is largely dead. I mean, again, you can't really look at it in isolation. It's really sort of renewables plus storage together as a picture. I don't know if you've discussed before the concept of the energy trilemma, that you have to balance affordability, sustainability, and reliability, and that it used to be this like three-legged stool that was impossible to stand straight on, because, for instance, if you rewind 5 or 10 years, renewables were more expensive than fossil fuels, and you needed the fossil fuels for reliability. So you could go down the sustainability route and have your renewables, but it would be more expensive and less reliable. Have to back everything up. But ultimately, the trilemma is no more, right? Because if you look at the cost of now renewable energy in most markets, Bloomberg New Energy Finance have identified now that the cheapest form of electricity generation in 2/3 of the world, so 2/3 of the world's population, the cheapest form of electricity that you can form is renewable. And storage solves the reliability issue with that. So no longer are you having to sacrifice, affordability or reliability if you go down the sustainable route. The cheapest form of electricity generation is also the sustainable one. So problem solved. There's maybe a few markets still where it's not the cheapest form of electricity generation, but each year renewables are getting cheaper and cheaper, batteries are getting cheaper and cheaper. So like 2/3 of the world is not bad going to start with, and we'll get the rest.
Wow, so many different uses for batteries. I love it. Okay, and so policy-wise, Marek, I mean, you talked about the different countries that are seeing growth in energy storage, including Chile, which I didn't know about. Is that being driven by policy, and what should regions or countries that want to drive more energy storage in their area, what is smart policy to you?
So it comes in many different flavors because every market is different for how it's structured. And
you don't just have one answer, Marek. It's always complicated.
He's way too smart, Scott. Come on. We should have learned this by now.
You have to go back and like put one of those ding counters for every time I say, well, it depends.
Yeah. No, I do it too. Go ahead, please.
Let's put it this way. There's a few different things. So one of the things that the US has done particularly well was Ferc Order 841, which is basically a regulatory rule which said create open and equal market access for energy storage for batteries and other technologies to provide the same services that power plants and other technologies provide. The reason that that's really useful is if you come back to the Wild West of 2015, where we talked earlier about me working on that first battery in Europe, is when you bring a new technology to the market and the rules say are built around power plants, it's very difficult to tick the boxes from a regulatory standpoint for a new technology, because you're not a power plant. So if you're trying to be treated like a power plant, you won't necessarily fit all the rules. So there are basically like catch-22 scenarios like that stop batteries competing to provide exactly the same services that power stations provide, like spinning reserve or whatever it is. And if you remove the barriers to them doing those jobs, then they do them much, much better than traditional technologies, because batteries are far more flexible. They respond much quicker. They're more accurate because they're digital technologies in how they follow these things. But if the rules say that technically you're not allowed to compete because you're not a fossil fuel power plant, that's what creates a market barrier that slows the adoption of storage. So that's one really big area. The second, I would say, is something as simple as pay for performance. All right. So once you've opened the market up and you let different technologies compete to provide the same service to help the grid stay stable, differentiate based on how well they do it. Right. So batteries, again, you go back to it, they respond in like hundreds of milliseconds. Power stations respond in minutes. And there's an important difference for balancing the grid second to second that means that one of those is more valuable to you, and therefore you should pay it more. Because if you do that, then the business case for the energy storage and for the flexibility it provides is stronger. Then the third one that's probably very effective is setting targets. So in the UK, for instance, there's net zero legislation, which basically means by 2050, the entire energy sector has to reach net zero emissions. And that sends a very, very strong signal that renewables and storage is needed. So there's those macro level market signals that you can send. And then some, countries and states have become much more targeted. So California is like leading in the US because it set a specific state target for having, a number of megawatts of batteries online by a certain time. So those are probably like the three key levers: access to markets, differentiate to pay for performance, so pay for actually what you need, and set targets for the adoption of the technologies.
All right, Jay, you can get Marek a meeting with Joe Biden, right?
Yeah, I was about to say, Marek, when are you going to serve in public office over here? Because we could really use a resource like that. Although it is nice to hear, Scott, you don't really hear this especially the last 4 years, where the U.S. is doing something well, respectively, or like relatively speaking, in certain fields when it comes to sustainability. So, Marek, we thank you for that at the very least. But we do now want to transition, Marek, into our typical last question for you. So this is what we call our party fact question. So let's say we're at a party. Perhaps this is a gathering outside in a COVID-friendly way, perhaps on the side of a river that previously would have had to get dammed to produce power, but now with electricity and energy storage capabilities does not have to. So we're in this beautiful setting, and we're talking to folks, and we want to provide one party fact when it comes to energy storage that they will hold on to and stick with for who knows how long. So, Marek, if we are going to present our definers with one party fact that they can share that conveys the importance of energy storage, what would that be?
So I guess one short thing you could think about saying is that the grid is moving from this old analog system of, spinning thermal power plants to a digital one where you've got technologies that are solid state like solar and batteries. And the reason that that's happening so quickly is because of how solar and battery costs are falling. They're digital technologies, so they're very rapidly reducing in cost year by year. In the last 10 years, we've seen 90% reduction in cost of batteries, and in the next 10 years, it's expected to fall another 50%. So a steep learning rate is meaning that the uses for batteries are increasing, and this transition is happening faster and faster.
And more money for parties. We can share these facts.
Fantastic. Well, Marek, this topic has been so fascinating. You are so versed in so many of these aspects. We've loved our conversation with you. So thank you again so much for joining us. And we are excited to share this with all of our definers out there.
No problem. I'm delighted to have joined. It's been a good chat.
Thanks so much, Marek. And I hope when we can travel again, our paths will cross in person. I can see the Instagram post now. All right. Thanks, Marek.
Thanks again, Marek. All right, Scott, Parker. Admittedly, this was a lengthy but weighty, action-packed, information-rich episode. But alas, my battery has run out and I have no more energy to finish. I think it's time to wrap it up.
Jay, where's your pumped storage hydropower?
Scott, I've moved on to, wow, we've mentioned so many advanced, next level batteries. I can't even name one, but it's something just so far-fetched that it's incredibly efficient.
Go on eBay and get a flywheel.
I'll tell you, every time I hear flywheel, I think of that spinning studio.
Me too.
Right? Right? So maybe...
I hope they're doing okay.
Maybe we can, power ourselves like that, ESPN Lance Armstrong commercial where he's, cycling and powering the building. Maybe that's something that ARPA-C can look into.
Nice.
Sounds promising.
All right, so let's run down the list and thank the folks that help us do what we do. First off, Square Peg Round Hole and Potions for providing the music we use in our episodes.
We'd also like to thank Scott's mom, Adrienne Breen, a fantastic researcher here on the team, Keaton, our dedicated editor, and Matt Ahrens, our social media guru.
And of course, Parker, we can't wrap up this episode without thanking you too. This was an incredible caliber of research here, and I know our definers are better off for it. So thanks to you too.
And it was part of your Duke Energy internship of sorts over the summer too, to look into this, right, Parker?
Yes, huge thanks to the Duke Energy Initiative who sponsored me to do a lot of this really cool work that I got to do with you guys all summer. Made it a lot of fun.
Awesome. Okay, so we also want to remind you to please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. We are going to keep reading reviews, so hopefully this incentivizes you to take the time and provide that review. We got some really good ones recently. It was actually tough to choose this time around. But we got one from Grace F94. This was left on November 20th, and Grace titled it Best Thing to Happen to Me in 2020. 3 exclamation points.
The bar was possibly set a little bit low, but we still appreciate it, Grace.
Yeah. So here's what she wrote. Literal best discovery. Scott and Jay are incredible. They're the kind of people you just can't help but want to be friends with. We are your friend, Grace. That's me talking now. And not just because they bring rad party facts to the table. They're quirky, fun, and engaging, and you can tell they put so much thought and research into each podcast. I'm simultaneously astounded and fascinated by each and every episode. For someone looking to pivot into sustainability, Scott and Jay's podcast serves as an incredible foundation. They cover a wide breadth of topics with enough depth to educate you and leave you intrigued, ready to dive in deeper. Sustainability is of paramount importance, and I'm so thankful to have the opportunity to join their journey to define sustainability. Grace F94. Oh my goodness.
I'm just beaming. Grace. Thank you so much.
Smiling ear to ear. And we are friends. Post-COVID, we're hanging out, Grace, F94. All right, so with that, Parker and Jay, I think that about does it. You all stay sustainable out there. I'm Scott Breen.
I'm Shannon Parker.
And I'm Jay Siegel. We will see you next time.